In 1902, on the French island of Martinique, the long-dormant Mount Pelée volcano erupted. Molten lava and clouds of ash ravaged the island, killing an unspeakable number of people. The fires burned all that lived on the then Paris of the Caribbean, Saint-Pierre. Many believe that there was only a single survivor in the city that day. This is how he came to survive the deadliest volcano of the 20th century, and a look at how it all could have been avoided. Before the disaster, Saint-Pierre was arguably one of the best cities in France's maritime possessions. Sprawling, large, safe, idyllic, and Parisian. Dominating the island of Martinique, it came to hold over 20,000 by the end of the 19th century. It wasn't called the Paris of the Antilles or the tropical Venice for no reason. It was one of the most developed cities of its time outside of Europe and North America. Its official historians cite that the city had tramways, working electricity, and international banks. It was, without a doubt, one of the most urbanised places outside of metropolitan France. With this all in mind, how did one volcano destroy it all? What follows is a story of bureaucracy, confusion, and frustration. There were signs that something was wrong with the mountain as early as a decade before. From 1889, small volcanic activity had been noted, though largely ignored by the locals. It was dismissed as just the result of living at the base of a volcano. 1901 saw minor sulphurous fumes expunged, but yet, no one cared. It was the March and April of 1902 that it all truly began. The volcano suddenly reawoke after centuries of dormancy. Thick, dense clouds emanated from the volcano, warnings of imminent danger. Experts now know that these are called fumaroles. In some cases, they can precede the horrors of volcanic activity. Had this happened today, the city would have likely been evacuated. However, true knowledge of volcanology was limited. No experts in the field happened to live in the entirety of the city, and the commonly held knowledge of the time was poor. There was, however, talk of an evacuation, but it never came. Historians have noted in decades since that the Saint-Pierre legislature was to be holding an election in the middle of May, and as such the government was reluctant to issue a warning. Louis Mouet, the governor of Martinique, believed that the volcano posed no danger to both people in Saint-Pierre and the Martinique people as a whole. He was strongly against any measure to evacuate the region. By late April, residents reported a sulphuric smell strongly in the air. But still nothing happened, and Saint-Pierre, the capital of Martinique, continued as normal. By the first week of May, the situation had truly begun to unfold. Earthquakes, floods, and ash clouds began to damage houses and disrupt communication with the outside world. The electricity grid had been disabled by the tremors. Insects and pests from up the mountain travelled downstream, affecting wildlife and becoming a nuisance. In the most distressing case, mud flow destroyed a refinery outside of Saint-Pierre, killing 24. People in nearby villages and communities sought refuge in Saint-Pierre, so as to avoid volcanic activity higher up on the mountain. And yet, there was still no official evacuation. In fact, the direct opposite occurred. Mouet ordered the closure of roads between Fort-de-France, Martinique's other large city, and Saint-Pierre. Officials connected to the mayor's political party, however, decided to leave, in part because they could afford to do so. A report commissioned by Mouet assessed the danger to human life to be minimal. This report, incidentally, was published the same day as the refinery incident. Society tried to continue as normal for the next few days, even if there was a strong sense of panic within the public. The arms of law and government continued as if the volcano didn't. And for a man called Ludger Silberis, this would prove to be lucky. Conflicting reports suggest that Ludger was either involved in a bar fight or inciting a riot. Regardless, he was arrested for violent conduct and jailed for over a month. Eventually he broke free, and on the 7th of May, oddly decided to turn himself in. He was placed in solitary confinement in a large, strong cell outside of the main police station. He was asleep the following morning. At around 8 o'clock on the 8th of May 1902, pyroclastic flow of over 100 miles an hour took a hold of what was once the Paris of the Antilles and engulfed everything in its path. In the blink of an eye, 30,000 people lost their lives. The city was completely destroyed in barely a minute's time. Mouet and his wife, having come to investigate the volcano for themselves, died too. A cruise liner docked in Saint-Pierre was destroyed, killing almost all of its passengers. Fires burned what was once left of the city. Covered in the thick, strong walls of the isolated cell, Cerberus miraculously managed to survive the disaster. For a few days he waited for salvation, burned but otherwise uninjured. He was finally rescued and was taken to hospital in Fort-de-France. He would later be pardoned for the assault and would go on to live and work in America as part of Barnum and Bailey's travelling circus. He in fact became one of the first black circus performers in the entirety of America. While his survival was miraculous, he was not the only survival in Saint-Pierre. While the overwhelming majority of people died instantly, a few survived the initial flow and died after being discovered by humanitarians. Reports of a girl swimming offshore to safety have been reported, but are not as substantiated as Cerberus' story. There was, however, another confirmed survival, one as documented as the story of Cerberus. One often forgotten due to the reclusivity of the man who would come to live by it. Indeed, he is almost completely ignored by many sources on the Mount Pelée disaster. His story is, in many ways, even more miraculous. Léon Compère-Léon is certainly an obscure figure. No photo is known to exist of him, and every detail of his appearance, even his ethnicity, is uncertain. What is known is that he lived his life in Saint-Pierre and owned a shoe shop in the central business district of the city, Place Béthune. How he survived is uncertain. Some claim that when news of the flows began, he decided to take refuge in the basement of his shop, a plausible survival attempt. Some have speculated he managed to avoid the pyroclastic flow by jumping into the waters nearby, scalding him but ensuring his survival. As of writing, both these separate contradictory interpretations are cited by Wikipedia as being definitive depending on which language you are to view the article in. His own portrayal of events, first published in a French scientific bulletin in 1902, contradicts both in entirety. He says that he was sheltered in his house, believed by a San Diego State University study as being located on the edge of where the pyroclastic flow hit. However, while the story of exactly how he survived is uncertain, he did miraculously survive the most destructive volcanic incident of the 20th century, in one of the most heavily affected areas of the disaster. While he survived, he, similarly to Cerberus, suffered strong burns across his body. After making his way to another village, he was rescued and too made his way to Fort-de-France. From here, reports say he was sent back to the village to act as an arm of law enforcement. But unfortunately, volcanic activity was far from over. On the 20th of May, a second wave hit the area again, killing 2,000 aid workers, destroying the fragments of what remained in the city, and further obliterating what remained of the countryside. And miraculously, Léon survived again. Little more is known about Compère-Léon's life past this incident. It is believed that he worked on another part of the island until his death in the 1930s. Aid came in from across the globe, with America and France coordinating resettlement efforts in Dominica. The island, under its next governor, would shift power entirely to Fort-de-France on a permanent basis. While parts of Saint-Pierre were eventually resettled, the island as a whole arguably never recovered from the losses of May the 7th. While Mouet believed he was right, containing people within Saint-Pierre only led to the deaths of more people from an inevitable accident. From the second the insects travelled downhill, the warning flare was fired, and Mouet should have acted to move people away. Holding a local election should never have been a predicament of life or death. In a gross, reckless attempt to keep the situation from upsetting the balance of power, everyone, irrespective of class, wealth, or status, perished in what may have been an avoidable tragedy. However, he acted on limited knowledge and ability. A large evacuation on the scale of Saint-Pierre would have been a logistical nightmare at the time, and due to its economic status over the entire island, it was certainly undesirable. Thanks to the development of geological science over the past century, such a dismissal of a large-scale natural disaster's threat to human life is thankfully far less likely. While no good can come of those who were needlessly killed in the Saint-Pierre disaster, it is the study of their loss of life that has inadvertently saved countless others. This was in fact the first time a pyroclastic flow was observed by scientists. Understanding the danger of them has allowed scientists and governments to evacuate people before it is too late, such as Mount Unzen and Montserrat in the 1990s. We tend to think of city-raising volcanoes on a scale of this kind as being relegated to antiquity and fiction. A Pompeii could never have happened 1,000 years ago, let alone 100. But it did, and the pearl of France's overseas collections was lost because of it. We forget that regardless of what we may desire, nature has plans of its own, and wherever we can, we must have a way to protect all that stand to be affected by it. Municipal elections be damned.